Good morning, everyone. It's a blessing to be able to gather here together with you this morning, that we can worship together. I invite you to open up to Genesis chapter 6 this morning. That'll be the bulk of our text that we'll be looking at this morning, Genesis chapter 6. And while you're taking that time to turn over there in your Bibles to read along with us, I'd like to say thank you for everyone for coming out this morning to be with us. I'd like to welcome our visitors that we have with us. We invite you to come back in the opportunity that you may have. As we begin there in Genesis chapter 6, looking at that this morning, I'd like to look at one of the themes there of Genesis chapter 6. For many, it may be a familiar section of Scripture. It's going to be talking about Noah and the ark, but I think it's also indicative of one of the themes that we see throughout God's Word, and this is, I think, one of the earliest examples of that, and that is God's desire to save. It's a concern for His creation and their soul, and while we think of Genesis chapter 6 and the flood, of the destruction of many lives upon this earth, I think it really actually speaks more so to God's desire to see life preserved, to see souls saved, to see the gospel continued. And so there's some of those things I'd like us to look at this morning. And first and foremost, let's begin there in chapter 6, at part of the theme here being that God's desire was to preserve. As he looks upon the earth in Genesis 6, read there verses 1 down through verse 4, and he sees all the wickedness that is on the earth and the men that have begun to multiply, and really the entirety of his creation other than 8 people, completely abandoning God and serving Him and obeying Him, and the wickedness growing further and further. Finally, God picks up in verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, that every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that He had made man on the earth, and He was grieved in His heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of this earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am very sorry that I have made them. It's reached a point in creation, and that point will be reached again, and the result will be different once that point is reached again. But it's reached a point here in Genesis chapter 6, after a few generations here upon this earth, 99.9% of mankind has abandoned God. Their thought is only to do evil upon this earth, to continue in there, and God says, I see the future of this. There's no changing this. They've set their destination. It's time for it to be wiped out. With one exception. He looked upon Noah and he looked upon his family. And Noah, there beginning in Genesis 6 and verse 8, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is a genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in all of his generations. Noah walked with God. We studied a couple months ago about his grandfather Enoch, and Enoch walked with God, and we talked about him being a prophet there of God and God taking him away. And the same type of thing that is mentioned about Enoch, though we know very little about him, is said again of Noah. Noah walked with God, and God says, no, I still desire to preserve life. I don't completely want to wipe everything out. Noah, you and your family who are faithful have proven that there is still hope for the human race. And man that I have breathed my life into, that have made in my image, there is still hope. For everybody else, they're out of time. But for you, Noah, God says, I'm going to give another opportunity. Beginning in verse 11 of Genesis chapter 6, the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. God told Enoch, I'm going to destroy the earth very soon. And Enoch named his son Methuselah, whose names meant, at the end comes judgment. God told Enoch this was coming. Enoch preached and taught for hundreds of years, and prophesied, and still it did no good. And now again, God is telling Noah, listen, I've spent the last couple hundred years warning my creation. They have not listened. The time is now at hand. It is time for life to be wiped out. But Noah, here's what you can do to save some, both yourself and the animals upon the earth. Verse 14, make yourself an ark out of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. God prepared a preservation plan and an escape plan to avoid judgment. His hope was to save life and to keep life going into what it is here today on earth. Verse 17 continues, behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters upon the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you. You shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, and keep them alive with you, and they shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you, and you will keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten. You shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. So God says, listen, take 2 of every kind. He'll break that a little bit down further in Genesis chapter 7. Take 2 of every kind of unclean animal. Of the clean animals, take 7 of every kind. Male and female, the extra individual of the clean animals is going to be sacrificed when the ark lands. But of the clean animals, there's going to be 3 pairs that are going to multiply. Of the unclean animals, there's going to be 1 pair. They're going to multiply. You're going to take all that upon the earth. You're going to take at least 2 of every pair. You're going to take food and seeds for yourself and for the animals upon the ark. You're going to go on there, and as I'm going to send a flood, and I'm going to wipe out the rest of humanity and the rest of life here upon this earth, you will be preserved and you will be saved. It's no different really in the New Testament than what God has aligned for his kingdom and his church and baptism and salvation, as we've been studying that other series on Sunday night. In every generation, God has warned people of judgment to come, of punishment that is going to come if wickedness continues, while at the same time offering a way of escape and preservation. Noah, if you do this, God says, you, your wife, your sons, their wives, and the animals that are on the ark with you, the plants that are on the ark with you, will be saved. And it's indicative of, really, God knew what he was doing as well. There's some arguments that have come up in recent years, and it's been argued over and over about, how did the ark work? It's hard to wrap our minds around how was he able to take all the animals and all the humans on there and preserve this on here. And I think sometimes we dwindle God's understanding of he knew what he was doing. When he told Noah to make an ark, he knew what a flood was going to be, that a flood was coming. He told him in verse 17, "Behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters upon the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life, and everything that is on earth you shall die." Now, what kind of God would he have been if he had told Noah to build a dinghy and it couldn't even fit his whole family on it? God would have been incompetent then. God knew what he was doing. He told Noah the designs of what the ark was supposed to look like, the extent in which it was supposed to be built, how it was supposed to be put together. We're not even really sure up until this point that mankind had even seen rain. In Genesis chapter 2 there, verses 5 through 6, at that time, at least, and maybe continuing on until Noah's day, at that time in Genesis chapter 2, beginning in verse 5, before any plant of the field was on the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth. There was no man to till the ground, but a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. The Lord formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed life into his nostrils, the breath of life, and man became a living being. At least up until that point, just the only thing that had watered the earth was the mist that rose every single morning and watered the earth, and that was enough. So we're not even sure at this point by Genesis chapter 6 that Noah would have even understood what a flood was or what rainwater was unless God described it to him. We definitely know at this point they may have been building small boats. They would have never built anything to a scale of what the ark looked like. At the very least, even if rain was or wasn't a thing at that point, this ark was a just fundamentally new invention that man had never built up until that point. And God told him to prepare it. When you pick up there in Genesis 6, beginning in verse 14, Make yourself an ark out of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. Its width 50 cubits. Its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. And you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. So God even tells him, here's what the dimensions are supposed to look like, here's what the window's supposed to look like, here's what the door is supposed to look like, here's what the decks are supposed to look like. There's supposed to be 3 separate decks that are going to be on the ark. Here's how I want you to design this thing. God knew what he was doing. As we've studied on Wednesday night, as we've been looking at some of our evolution study, and we talked about God's understanding of what the ark meant, we talked about the golden ratio that's needed to float something. to allow a ship to be able to stay above water and not capsize or not sink. There's a ratio that has to be put there. I believe it's 30 to 5 to 1, if my memory serves me correctly. But there's a ratio there that's found in the ark and is still being used today on every ship that we make. You can't just throw a bunch of wood or metal or whatever else together, throw it on the ocean or throw it on a lake and hope that it stays up. There's some understanding that has to go into that design process, and God understood that. He prepared that. It wasn't a trial and error of over 100 years, that Noah was trying and failing and it falling apart and it not working and some things floating and some things not. God designed it all and gave him the blueprints. If you do what I say, it will work. It will save you. It will take care of you. God had Noah prepare food. Verse 21, he tells him, you shall take for yourself all the food that is eaten, you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. The English Standard Version says, you shall gather for yourself all food and every seed that is upon the earth. So he took for themselves not only things that they needed to eat and live, but things that they needed to replant. Now, some things grew back on their own as they landed, as we won't get to that this morning, but as Noah sends out birds to see if the seas have subsided, that they can go and walk upon dry land. A dove brings back an olive branch, so some things did grow back, but some things, especially I imagine crops and things that they needed to eat, were taken upon the ark and prepared. As soon as we land, we can go out, we can start planting, we can start growing gardens, we can start fertilizing the world and doing what we need to. And all of this, God took it into account. And so then another question that often comes up is, well, the ark seems awful small to hold everything, especially when we start thinking of dinosaurs. And again, I think we underestimate God's not only design, but we underestimate how big the ark actually is. You know, we picture the ark, and it's probably mostly something like a big square barge. It wasn't some of the pictures that you see of some really fancy boat with all the rigging and everything. It was a freighter, it was a barge that was meant to just hold things. Noah and his family weren't sailing the thing, they weren't moving it around, they weren't circumnavigating the globe. It was meant to float and hold them, and really that was it. And so we think about that, and then we picture a dinosaur, and there's these massive things like T-Rexes and mastodons and brachiosaurs, and here are these huge creatures. How could all of this fit upon the ark? Well, we read the numbers there in Genesis chapter 6, and it's just kind of numbers, and it's sometimes hard to picture. To put it instead of cubits, something that we're a little bit more familiar with, the ark is 450 feet long, it's 75 feet wide, and it's 45 feet tall. That's bigger than most buildings you and I go into, anything other than a skyscraper. It's bigger dimensions than this building, for sure. The idea of the ark is, hey, it's not only that kind of space, there's 3 separate decks, each of them over 100,000 square feet. My house is close to 1,400 square feet. Each room in that ark was over 100,000. These are huge areas to be able to hold anything. To put that in greater perspective, it's 1.4 million cubic feet and would be able to hold 14,000 gross tons. Each ton is 2,000 pounds, so multiply 14,000 times 2,000, and all of a sudden, hey, this thing is a lot bigger than it first looked like. And then we start looking at the little dinosaurs you've been noticing as the sermon's gone on. It keeps kind of shrinking and shrinking. We just picture these huge creatures as well. They're massive. Surely they couldn't have fit on the ark. We see illustrations of the ark that some people paint, and put them in a lot of times the kids' classes. And here's this ark, and here's an elephant sticking out its head, and here's a giraffe sticking out its head, and it's just bursting to the seams just to hold a couple animals on there. And that's not what God designed. God designed a massive freighter, a ship, an ark to preserve life. He knew what he was doing. You know, when we start talking about dinosaurs, we start looking and noticing, every deck is 100,000 square feet. You realize every deck could hold 522 shipping containers. Start to add that up and we go, oh, that's actually a pretty big ship. We passed a fully loaded train yesterday. My wife and I spent the weekend enjoying and celebrating our anniversary and went up to Cleveland. And we passed a big train, and here's one train, and each train pretty much holds 64 stock cars, and that's about the most they can pull. We passed one of those, and I felt like the thing was never going to end. Each deck of the ark could carry 8 trains of loads, each train carrying 64 stock cars. The thing had 3 decks. We're talking over 1,500 shipping containers. There's a huge amount of room on this thing. Well, then we start talking about, okay, what's the size of all the animals that are on there? Trying to compare the size of the biggest dinosaurs that, even though we don't fully know what they looked like and what size they were, and there's a lot even come out in recent years about a lot of dinosaurs have kind of been slapped together, and we don't actually totally know what all they look like, and there's a lot of dinosaurs that have been invented and come up with because someone wanted their name on something. The average size of a dinosaur is about the average size of an animal, the size of a sheep. Now, trying to compare, if we just look at what we have around today that we can see, trying to compare a giraffe, you can go up to the Cleveland Zoo and see them. Trying to compare a giraffe and say all animals on the earth are the size of a giraffe seems pretty foolish, doesn't it? Trying to compare an African bull elephant and say, well, if that thing's walking upon the earth, then everything else must be of comparable size, right? Many of you got pets at home, or all your pets the size of a giraffe or of an African bull elephant or even close. I know some of you got some big dogs, but none of them that big. We got a fat cat, nothing of that size. You start comparing the average size of an animal that would have been on the ark. Sure, there's some bigger things, and to another extent, a lot of lizards and a lot of animals and a lot of, especially what we think of dinosaurs, what we think we know about them. The biggest ones are a lot like giraffes and a lot like elephants. The older they are, the bigger they kind of get. They're slowly growing as they get older. God's not going to pick the most ancient animals to throw on the ark. He's going to pick the younger ones that are going to reproduce a lot. So even of the animals, he's probably not picking the biggest of each of these to go on the ark. But hey, we start breaking down, okay, how much actually can fit on there? And each of these shipping containers that you see on a train that are double-decker or that a truck might be pulling, 240 sheep fit on those on average. Now start adding that up to over 1,500 shipping containers that would fit on the ark. Start doing that math and realizing, hey, there's a lot of animals that could have fit on there on top of the 8 humans and the food that was needed. Remember as well, we read here just a moment ago, he said, 2 each according to their kind. He did not bring a German Shepherd and a Lab and a Husky and a Chihuahua and a Dachshund he didn't bring every breed, each after its own kind. There were probably a couple kind of cats. I'm sure there were lions, and I'm sure there was something closer to a smaller house cat, because those two don't tend to breed and cross over very well. But we've got some common ancestors that can keep multiplying, and we've then designated them as different breeds as time goes on. Probably didn't bring 18 different kinds of elephants. It was, okay, maybe a couple kinds of elephants were put on the ark. A couple kinds of giraffe, a couple kinds of dog, a couple kinds of cats, a couple kinds of cows. Wasn't every breed of cow that you can look at. And I'm from not only visiting Texas a lot with my grandparents, I'm from Kentucky, and we talk about horses, and we talk about cows, and you start listing off miles and miles of names and different breeds and cross breeds that men are coming up with and what they taste like and what they race like. And hey, all of that wasn't on the ark. Here's a few each according to its kind. You start narrowing that down a bit, and I'll go, hey, there's a lot of room here. In fact, most estimates say with all the animals, with all the food, and with the 8 souls that were on board, most of them estimate between 25 and 30% of the ark was empty. And I say all that to say this: God's design and his purpose, his desire was to save. What was Enoch doing for a couple hundred years? He was prophesying and he was preaching and warning people of a judgment to come. What was Noah doing for 100 years as he built the ark? He was preaching. He was trying to convince people that, hey, this flood is coming, this danger is coming. God has warned me about it. You need to shape up. You need to fix your life. You need to join us on the ark. God didn't leave the thing stuffed to the brim. He left room for people to join. Genesis chapter 7, beginning in verse 1, the Lord said to Noah, "Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take each with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female. 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Also 7 each of the birds of the air, male and female, to keep their species alive upon the face of the earth." Continue on down to verse 7 of chapter 7. So Noah, with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of clean animals, of the animals that are unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps upon the earth, 2 by 2 went into the ark to Noah, male and female, as God commanded Noah. Everything went on the ark that God deemed. Here's the animals that they can keep multiplying and they can keep growing. Here's your family that's going to further multiply and grow. But here's your family, first and foremost, because you were righteous. It's amazing here when we talk about God's desire and His design to save, both in the Old and in the New Testament, there's a running through factor and theme that we see, and that is that God gives people time. He has given people opportunity after He has shown them what they are doing is sinful and it is wrong and it is separating Him from all of eternity. He has given them time to make that right. We had some debate in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3 when we studied the book of Genesis a couple months ago, and we thought at first when God was saying in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3 that the days of man shall be 120 years, we thought He was saying that's how old they were going to be, some of us thought. Upon further reflection and looking at this, I think it's a different standard here God is saying. Verse 3, the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for indeed he is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." Then He speaks to Noah and tells Noah to prepare the ark and be ready, and Noah preaches for about 100 years. What God is saying here is not men are going to live to be 120 years old from here on out, because we know that's not the case as we keep reading throughout the book of Genesis and even into Exodus. No, what He's saying here is, all right, here's the date. 120 years from now, the world's going to be flooded. He's still giving more time and opportunity, even after He had already spoken to Enoch. Even after Enoch has already prophesied and named his son Methuselah, whose name means when he dies, judgment comes. Now He's saying to Noah, and as Noah's preaching to the people, you have 120 years. You better be ready. Here it's coming. God has promised it. What are you going to do about it? Really, it's the same attitude that Peter's making the same kind of conclusions and talking about the same kind of things that we're studying this morning. Over in the New Testament this time, turn over to 2 Peter chapter 2 with me. 2 Peter chapter 2, begin there with me in verse 5. "And He, that is God, did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing the flood on the world of the ungodly." God worked with Noah for over 100 years as he preached. Noah wasn't just in the ark building business, he was in the preaching business. He was watching out not only for his own family, I imagine, but trying to speak to and reach everyone that he could. Men preach their heart out today about Judgment Day that is coming, about a date that we don't know when it's going to happen. I wonder how much more urgent Noah's preaching was when he knows the date and the general time period of when it's coming. As the years tick by, as the ark is being built, as he watches year after year and season after season pass, knowing what is coming, I can't even imagine the heartbreak and the pleas that he was making with neighbors, with friends, with family members, warning them of what is about to come. And sadly, no one listened. Yes, God is long-suffering. God waited patiently, but at the end of the day, that patience comes to an end. Back a couple pages to 1 Peter chapter 3 there in verse 20. Again, Peter touches upon this in 1 Peter 3 and verse 20 we read, who formerly were disobedient, when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through water. More could have been saved, more could have gotten on the ark, but only 8 listened. Only 8 people obeyed. I think it also speaks to, yes, God is long-suffering, and sometimes we may read Genesis chapter 6 and similar passages where God brings judgment upon nations and worlds and kingdom, but I think it again speaks to God's design and God's understanding of who we are. When God said in Genesis chapter 6, it is time for the earth to be destroyed, this generation is lost, and it's not going to change, no one else obeyed. He knew their hearts and knew no one else would listen. He knew when he spoke to Abraham about Sodom and Gomorrah. He knew not even 10 souls were in there that were righteous, and even Lot and his household had to be dragged out, and his wife didn't even make it. God knows when it's time for a nation to end, for a people to end, where their hearts are set to do evil continually. He is patient and he is long-suffering, but eventually it comes to an end. When men and women no longer want to listen and they no longer want to obey, and no matter how much pleading and warning has been given, if they stop their ears and set their hearts to do evil, he's not going to change it. It happened in Genesis chapter 6. Something similar will happen when Judgment Day comes and this earth and everything in it is burned up. It happens in our lives. Eventually, each and every one of our lives is given an end. All men are faced to die. God gives us opportunity. God gives us time upon this earth. He promises us today. He does not promise us tomorrow. What he has promised is, here's the way in which you can be saved. What he has promised is ways that we can escape destruction. Ways in which we can avoid judgment. Then he leaves the ball in our court of what we're going to do. Genesis chapter 7 and verse 21, again we read, all flesh died that moved upon the earth, birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life that was on the dry land died. So God destroyed all living things which were on the face of the earth, both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth, and only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. There's only so much God can do when we refuse to listen. At some point, God says, evil has to come to a stop. Enough time has been given. Whether it's the end of our lives, whether it's the start of a flood here like in Genesis chapter 6 that he did once and promised he would never do again, or whether one day it comes the judgment where God says enough is enough. Again, the people's hearts on earth are set to do evil continually. There is no more opportunity. This is the end. Then God will make that decision again, and I trust that, again, he knows what he's doing. He knows the hearts of men. He's going to know better than you or I ever will of when that time is here. I just need to take advantage of the opportunities that I have today, like Noah and his family. To fear God, to keep his commandments, to do the best with what time I have here on this earth. Over in 1 Timothy chapter 2, again, this is another pattern that we see throughout God's Word. Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy 2, beginning in verse 3, for this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. God is not a heartless being that is looking down, that is relishing the destruction of his creation and the loss of souls for all of eternity. We read in Genesis chapter 6, his heart was breaking. He was cut to the heart. He was wailing. He was hurt. That the people that he made in his creation abandoned him and wanted nothing to do with him and joined Satan in doing evil continually. He wept at the wickedness that man decided to do. He desires all men to be saved. He wants us to obey the truth, but he also cannot tolerate sin. He knows what the end of further sin leads to. When he sees the stopping point, when he sees that no one else is going to obey, no one else is going to listen, why would he let that continue so that more souls can be lost for all of eternity? God was saying at that point, that's more cruel than wiping everything out and being done with it. Yes, his desire is to save, but at the end of the day, he also says there comes a stopping point when evil has to be squashed. We read verse 9 here a moment ago of 2 Peter chapter 2. Back up with me this time to verse 4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down into hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world and saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, and bringing the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemning them to destruction, making them an example of those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. He is addressing here this through line that we've been noticing this morning as well. God knows those who are righteous. God knows those who are his. He knows our hearts better than we know it. He wants to see us saved. He wants to see us in heaven with him for all of eternity, but the standard he has set is never going to change. God is righteousness, and in him cannot dwell wickedness, and it cannot even be in his presence. And so he gives time. He gives opportunity. He has set things in motion. He has given us the knowledge by which we need to be saved, by which we can obey him and have our sins redeemed through his Son and his sacrifice and his blood, by being washed in baptism. He has given us the means, like Noah, that we can serve him faithfully on this earth until the day that we die. His desire is to see every single soul saved. We have to want the same thing. We have to want to be with him. We have to want to put sin behind us and start living faithfully. Turn with me back a couple pages to 1 Peter chapter 3, and the lesson is yours. 1 Peter 3, begin in verse 18 with me, if you would. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but being made alive by the Spirit. By whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient when once the divine longsuffering waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through water. There is also an antitype which now saves us, baptism, not the removal of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience towards God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. God has not told us on what day this judgment is coming. That's going to belong to him and him alone. Not even Christ or the angels in heaven know when it's going to come. But just like Noah, he has given us a way to escape that judgment. He has given us the blueprints that we need to do in order to be saved and to serve him faithfully here on this earth. Lord willing, this evening we will continue our study of that blueprint system of what it really means to repent. But this morning, don't let the day slide by. We may not have this evening. We may not have tomorrow. If you recognize that your soul is in jeopardy, that judgment day is coming, that our lives here on this earth are short, and that you need to make a change, then let's take care of it today. I cannot imagine what was going through the hearts and the minds of the people as they saw the floodwaters coming and the ark's doors were shut. I imagine Noah and his family heard awful screaming and wailing as people died. There will be many tears on Judgment Day of loved ones, of friends, of family members, of brothers and sisters in Christ who have fallen away, who will be weeping and regretting that they did not do the right thing while breath was still in their lungs and while they still had time. And they will be lost for all of eternity, as heart-wrenching as that is. You and I need to take advantage of that opportunity this morning if you need to. Either by coming forward and being baptized because you believed that Jesus came to this earth and died for your sins. Turn away from setting your heart to do evil continually and set your heart to serve God. Confess Him as your Lord and Savior and be baptized, and your sins will be washed away. And then join us here as we strive to do what we can to obey God faithfully with whatever time that we have. If you're here this morning and you are a Christian that has fallen away, that has allowed sin back into your life, that has lost sight of the importance of our job here on this earth, and you have gone back to Satan, then make that right. Come forward and confess those things if it is of a public nature as God commands, and you will be forgiven. We will weep and rejoice with you, we will pray with you, and we will help you however we can. Whatever the case may be this morning, if the need calls for it, please come forward right now as together we stand and sing the song that has been selected.